Welcome to episode 97 of I Know What You Watched Last Week. It's just me. Yes, we can all be grateful that we finally got rid of that pesky Karen. She's not around anymore because I killed her. No, not really. We just had tighter, busier schedules this week, so I only watched one movie, which was going to be the first of the three, like we normally do. But we kind of scrapped that. So this week I watched two films. One of them was for I Know What You Watched Last Week, and the other one was just for pleasure. Because on the 13th of June, it was Karen and I's first year anniversary. That's right, last year we got married on Friday the 13th, as you do. So I chose Basket Case, a film pretty famous in the horror world, which I'd actually never seen before, and I'll tell you why. And also on June the 13th, after we did everything we wanted to do on our anniversary, got to the evening, I said to Karen, what do you feel like watching? I thought she was going to say, unsolved mysteries like usual. But she said, Urban Legend. And guess what? You ain't asked me twice to watch Urban Legend. So I ran to the bedroom, got my box set, popped it on, had a whale of a time. So instead of like rankings and stuff like we would normally do, I'm just going to vamp a little bit about both movies and kind of like go through a couple of the scenes in Basket's Case, especially because I hadn't seen it before. Now, before we decided to go this way, I said to Karen, because we don't have enough time to watch three movies, I've got an idea, or I can just talk about Basket Case and Urban Legend, which are two, they're not really comparable films. Obviously, they're completely different, but are both horror. And I was actually quite relieved when Karen said that she'll give it a miss this week, because I didn't actually want to watch Basket Case again. Not because I don't think it's a good film, because I thought it was a good film. It's good, not great, not rubbish, even though it's like completely amateurish all over. But after watching it, even during watching it, it just put me in a funk. It put me in such a funk that I was affected for the rest of the day. I was affected about halfway into the next day. During watching Basket Case, I got hungry, but then I made some food and I didn't want to eat it. Not because I was really grossed out what was on the screen. It was more the feeling that it was giving me. People would say that horror in general, the genre is about dealing with death, but really I think it's more about, the core of horror is about isolation and being left alone, loneliness. And that's the overriding feeling that I was getting from Basket Case, and especially that the movie is about deformity, and the way that my mind works, I just started thinking about people who have to live in certain ways. They're born into this world with disadvantages, and you wouldn't believe it watching this show probably, but I'm actually quite a sensitive person. I've got a lot of empathy, and I'd read a lot that Basket Case is humorous, the same way I guess that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is humorous. I didn't actually laugh at any of it. I can see how people might laugh and find some humor in it, but Belial, the Siamese twin who is deformed, who's attached to Dwayne and separated from Dwayne, I felt so bad for him. I felt really bad for him. It's the same thing as I used to get when I used to watch Disney when I was a child. See, from the age of like 4 to 7, my mum would bring me home Disney videos, and I loathed them. Pretty much because they would have situations where, animals were in peril, animals were dying. I can't take animals dying on screen. I can't take anyone going through a bad time on screen who can't really help themselves. So if you think I felt bad watching Basket Case, conversely, I'd watch Requiem for a Dream. And that's a pretty horrible film, but I wasn't, I didn't feel like I couldn't eat during that movie. It didn't put me in a funk or anything like that, because these are just people who have put themselves in that position, and they could have easily not got themselves to that point, or they could have helped themselves to get themselves out to the point where they got to. Where Jared Leto is pimping off Jennifer Connelly just so that they can pay for the next shot of drugs kind of thing. Whereas Belial in Basket Case, he's been dealt this hand. So just briefly, I'm sure most people have seen Basket Case. It's about Siamese twins who are separated against their will, and they go to New York City. They check into a really grimy, seedy, run-down, typical early 1980s New York City bedsit, I guess you would call it. full of grimy, gross characters. New York looking its finest when you still got all the peep shows, the sex shops, drug dealers harassing you on the street, all that stuff, which is gone now and doesn't make New York City anywhere near as cinematic as what it used to be. Also, it's kind of like antiquated because you see the Twin Towers in this film, and it just seems like an entire lifetime ago to me now. So yeah, the scene where Belial gets separated from Dwayne. It's like, the thing is, Belial the puppet, it's kind of laughable. It's the $30,000 movie where Frank Henenlotter called in favors from his friends and stuff like this to be in the film. And anyone that sees it, this is an exploitation horror film. And, it shows. I mean, let's get into a little bit of urban legend. These are two completely different films. Basket Case, Frank Henenlotter, this was the only movie he was ever going to make. This is at a time where movies were made on the back of a great idea and very little money, and you got all these quirky movies where urban legend is, the cynic in me said it was simply made to make money because it was used to cash in on the popularity of Scream at the time. These were coming out left, right and centre, but I absolutely loved that movie. Now, as just said, Basket Case put me in a funk. I felt really bad. Watching Urban Legend was the complete opposite. I could sit down and watch that movie pretty much every day in the daytime. It doesn't even have to be watched in the nighttime because it's not a horrible film kind of thing. Everyone in it is beautiful. Jared Leto, Rebecca Gayheart, Tara Reid, Michael Rosenbaum. Everyone's all done up. You've got that front cover where they're all lined up looking like models. And that's the thing. I came across both movies for the first time in the video store. And I didn't go to Blockbuster. I kept it real. I went to an independent movie rental store called Movieland in Arsworth. It was a great place. And when I used to walk through the door, turn to the right, and that was the horror corner, and it was dank. And that was the first time I came across Basket Case, and it was Belial poking out of the basket. And much like other horror movie artwork from the time, Hellraiser, Scanners, all that stuff, it really spoke to me. But there was something about it which I knew deep down it was going to make me feel bad. And I am quite careful about avoiding movies that make me feel bad. I don't think anything should be censored. If people want to kill animals in their movies and stuff like that, who am I to say that you shouldn't be doing it? But it's just personally not something that I want to see. And looking at Belial, I could tell that he was a helpless being, and it kind of like kept me away from it. Plus, it was in the dank corner of all these grimy horror films. Whereas Urban Legend, when I first saw that in the video store, it was in the brand spanking new releases. Here's Jared Leto with his winning smile and his salon fresh hair and stuff. But both of them are comparable because they are both horror movies, and it got me to thinking about drama, comedy. Comedy lives for one reason: to make you laugh, to make you smile. Drama, to make you, bored, I guess. Whereas horror, it's just it can go anywhere you want it to. And I think that's why I'm so disappointed by modern day movies. You wouldn't get a Basket Case these days, and if they wanted to remake it would probably be like funded by Netflix and would have nothing to do with what the original movie is about. And I said that Frank Henenlotter, he had no money and one idea. No matter what he was going to do, he was going to make Basket Case. Complete opposite with Urban Legend. Jamie Blank's the director. If he didn't do Urban Legend, he would have just been given another slasher film and he would have made it, and it would have made no difference. Whereas Basket Case is Basket Case. it's that straightforward idea where nothing is going to change. Now, I mentioned Requiem for a Dream. There's, you've got the double-ended dildo scene in that. But again, it didn't make me really feel bad. I didn't really feel bad about Jared Leto having his arm chopped off at the end. It didn't make me feel good, but it didn't have the same effect on me as what Basket Case did. Now, Basket Case is a weird one because it's amateurish on pretty much every level. Look at Belial himself. It's just this blob creature thing which is made of stop motion animation, and not good stop motion. Although saying it's not good, I actually thought it worked really well for the film. And when he kills people, all he does is jump on people's faces and mauls them, and you just get blood thrown over their face. It's a bit like fighting with a severed hand. It's the same thing with Belial, and it's what he's going through. So he's been separated from Dwayne, his twin. Dwayne is a regular looking guy. Dwayne cannot act, by the way. Jesus Christ, what is going on in this film? And now that Belial is separated from him and kept in his basket, they'd always managed to communicate telepathically, and since Belial got removed from Dwayne, Dwayne can no longer talk to Belial telepathically, but Belial can other way and tenfold compared to what it was when they were together. And Dwayne is saying that Belial is never giving him any rest. He's constantly in his head. And of course, Dwayne in the movie, he meets Sharon, and they're attracted to each other, but Dwayne can't let it be known out loud that he has a crush on Sharon because Belial is insanely jealous. And obviously Belial, just go a little bit to the themes. He's a suppressed rage of Dwayne as well. He's suppressed sexual rejection, things along this matter, and the kind of scenes that you get in here. So we've got Casey, who lives in the building, the motel, Hotel Broslin, if I remember correctly, is what it's called. And we bump into all these weird characters, like the guy that owns the Hotel Broslin, sleazy. His mate Donovan, sleazy, tries to steal Dwayne's money, gets his comeuppance by having his face eaten off by Belial. And he also meets, I think her name is Josephine, in the stairwell of this place, and she's just a bit of a loon. Then he meets Casey, who's a hooker. And once Belial gets knowledge of Casey in the Hotel Broslin, I've forgotten what it is, goes to her room, and there's this bit where she's getting ready for bed. Now she's getting ready for bed, the last thing she does is she pulls down her underwear, and all of a sudden Belial appears on top of her, this lump. He doesn't do anything at this point because she wakes up and screams, manages to fight him off. But then later on, he's in his bedroom, and he's like, he's got her knickers. He's got the... I think that bit was so good for me personally. Just this little freak thing in a basket sniffing away at a hooker's knickers. You're not getting that every day. And that, to me, that's kudos. And I'd only seen two other Frank Henenlotter movies before. That was Brain Dead and Frankenhooker. And they kind of lean way more into comedy. And once again, I know people say that Basket Case is funny, but personally, I just find it too grim to laugh at any of it. And talking about grim, there's a scene in Basket Case where the crew walked out of the set because they were just repulsed by what they were seeing. So I mentioned Sharon. So Sharon and Dwayne have been, trying to get together during the course of the movie, and they finally get to the point we get to this kind of like fever dream part where Dwayne's running through New York City naked while he's dreaming, and he sees an open window, and he actually wakes up in real life, and Belial has escaped his basket. Dwayne sees the window open, and then we see Belial in Sharon's apartment attacking her with his giant hands. She's screaming away. He ends up killing her, strangling her to death. Next thing you know, he's pumping away at her. So you have a deformed lump of fat and gristle committing necrophilia. Look, there are things about this film that I loved. I love that in particular, that part, because I think you should go as far as you can, especially in the world of horror. Personally, I think they might have been more offended by the fact that Belial, for the most part in this film, was played by one of the producer's 8-year-old's daughters, because no grown adult could fit their hands into the puppet of Belial. So it could very well be an 8-year-old girl which is pumping away at Sharon in that scene. I mean, what story to tell as a young 8-year-old girl when you grow up that, yeah, I was in Basket Case and I was raping a dead woman. Nothing like this happens in Urban Legend, and yet it is a horror. Everyone in Basket Case is a scumbag, the same way that in my movie Heathen pretty much everybody is a scumbag. But Urban Legend come about, like I said, because of the whole Scream craze kind of thing. Now, I've mentioned Requiem for a Dream. Jared Leto's in that. Jared Leto is in Urban Legend, as I guess he's the lead. Now, Jared Leto turned down a starring role in Scream. I'm not sure which one. If I had to guess, I would have guessed that he's probably been offered the part of Billy Loomis. That's what I would have imagined he was in. So once he turned that down and Scream became a huge success, his agent's like, oh my god, we've got to get Jared in a real hot smoking slasher film, because we've completely ballsed up by turning down Scream. So they were going through scripts. He ended up being tied down. He's like, look, you're going to be in Urban Legend whether you like it or not. Now, in my opinion, he's not the lead in Fight Club. He's not the lead in American Psycho. He is the lead in this, Jared Leto. So for me, Urban Legend is Jared Leto's best movie, but he disowns it. He refuses to talk about it. He thinks it's a piece of trash. It's like sometimes a lot of actors will get really uppity and embarrassed about being in films. Like, why would you be embarrassed about being in an urban legend when you've gone on to do, Morbius and that pathetic Joker portrayal and loads of others? Just taking himself far too seriously. What is offensive about urban legend and having been in that? I think it's a real shame that he disowns it. There is far worse movies that he's been in. And personally, I think Urban Legend is a great film. It came out at a great time. I mentioned the Video Shop between 97 and 99. I was renting like crazy, and Urban Legend came out in that time. You had Scream, Scream 2, I Know What You Did Last Summer, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, Wishmaster, The Craft, American Pie. I mean, this was like probably the best time in my movie life. I was too young to see all those movies, but it didn't matter. That's what makes it better when you see them when you're not supposed to. So Urban Legend worked as like a palate cleanse. Like, as I couldn't eat. Oh, I was very unhappy after watching Basket Case. But then I was thinking to me, what movie is better? On a technical level, obviously, Urban Legend just destroys Basket Case, because on a technical level, see it for yourself. Basket Case, it's not really living up to any real standard. But there was still something about it, because as soon as I finished watching it, and it made me feel horrible. But by the next day, I was thinking about it, and that's what a good movie does. Art evokes reaction, and Basket Case certainly evoked a reaction from me, to where I do actually want to go back and watch it now to see if I can find the comedy. And I know there's obvious comedy in there. It's just a funny movie because it's so poorly put together anyway. But it really got under my skin, and there's not many movies that can do that, and that's where it gains massive respect from me, even though it's not really one of my favourite films. And also, personally, I just prefer Urban Legend. I love 90s slashers anyway. I love 90s films. I was really thinking about it. I was like, what, gun to my head, what do I prefer, 80s slashers or 90s slashers? And I think I've just about got to go with 90s. It's kind of like more sophisticated, if that's the word, but not overly sheeny. It doesn't shy away still from the violence. And so I think both are to be respected. There's something as well, after I've mentioned this thing called sleepies. If you watched our horror collection video, there are certain movies that I have just to fall asleep. Now, there are certain films that I just absolutely cannot put on to fall asleep to. I can't fall asleep to The Exorcist, one, because it's too engaging. I couldn't fall asleep to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre just because it's too primitive, and again, it kind of like draws me in. And just kind of like Basket Case, I couldn't put on as a sleepy just because it's too horrible, doesn't make me feel good, doesn't induce sleep. Urban Legend, though, I can put it on and like, it's like a warm, comforting hug. Yeah, it's a horror film. This arena we have is amazing, because you've got Urban Legend, which is just a teen flick, no consequences. And you've got Basket Case, which it's the perfect arena, horror, to explore things like deformity and people who are put down upon. And it's still a taboo, isn't it? I think that deformity and kind of like dealing with it, if I'm wording that right, is really taboo. It's one of the last taboos, I think, along with probably incest, which again, horror is one of the only genres that can really deal with incest in a way where you don't have to hit people over the head with a sledgehammer with it. There are many themes in Heathen which deal with certain things. There are 4 rape scenes in the entirety of Heathen between part 1 and part 2, but they're not rape scenes. They're comments on things. In fact, I told Karen about the first rape scene that I'd written, and it's not a human being that's being raped. It's not an animal either. I'll leave it in the dark as to what is going on here, but it kind of like blew her mind, and that's why I knew I was really onto something. And I've written 3 more since, and it's not to be controversial. It's not to be attention seeking, anything like that. It's in there naturally, because I think that's what horror should be used for. It should be, and cinema in general, but especially horror, should be used to confront what you are most disgusted by. And I guess the thing that I'm most disgusted by in the world is rape and just the general mistreatment of human beings and the way that we treat each other. And I think that came through a lot in Basket Case. Not a nice film, not one that I'd happily go back to, but certainly one just out of intrigue that I do want to go back to it in a completely different way that I want to go back to Urban Legend just all the time. Urban Legend, like a lot of movies made these days, is kind of I guess you could say it's for the teenish market, young adult market. Basket Case is an adult film. You know, your 14-year-old tweens aren't going to be deriving any pleasure from Basket Case. I think if you think about the people these days who say they're violated by, you know, the Backrooms or some other horror movie which has just come out recently, Obsession. You know, I really think they'd need therapy if they go and see Heathen. They're going to need therapy if they go and see Basket Case, because they've just not been exposed to what the horror genre is all about. And the horror genre is not about Backrooms, it's about nothing. It should be about exploring what is primal inside of us and what scares us. Of course, Urban Legend is pretty derivative. It's just another slasher movie. There's nothing new here except for they build it around urban legends. Basket Case, I said, you know, it's a great idea with a tiny budget, and the premise of it, I think is superb. Like, I've read some reviews online saying, oh, the premise is pretty simple, but conjoined twins, one horribly deformed, separated against their will, moving to the big city to exact revenge on the people that separated them, including their father, who gets split down the middle by Belial. I think that's an absolutely brilliant premise, and it's the kind of premise which isn't done enough these days, because that's a real mean-spirited premise right there. And I love that. I love the way that the doctors got their comeuppance. Well, most the doctors' names, by the way, you know, Dr. Needleman, Dr. Cutter. Great obvious names for evil doctors, but it's Dr. Cutter who gets her face smushed in a bunch of scalpels when she lifts her face up and all the scalpels are sticking out of her face. That's probably apart from the bit where Belial has his way with Sharon, shall we say, it's the scalpels in the face that were my favourite part of that film. You could obviously play a drinking game to Basket Case as well. The amount of times people ask, what's in the basket? And I think one way that they maybe could have made this movie just a little bit better is if they'd kept what was in the basket secret just a little bit longer. But personally, it doesn't ruin the movie for me. And, you know, when he's got to hide poor little Belial from the residents of the apartment building and stuff, one of my favourite bits is when he's been hiding in the toilet and this lump of gristle just comes out of this disgusting motel toilet, and then Dwayne just walks up to him and like hugs him. I'm like, he's covered in toilet water. Disgusting. And Belial coming out of the toilet kind of like just gives away the whole tone of this film. That was another point where I felt really bad for Belial, because we don't hear Belial speak. Like I said, he communicates telepathically with Dwayne, and it's just Dwayne has just been out on a date, I believe, with Sharon, and Belial was like, oh, you're gonna leave me, you're gonna abandon me, I don't want to be left alone. And it just, I don't know why it hit me so hard in the feels, like this lump thing. And I think that shows how great the puppet, the creation of Belial was, because even when you first see it, it's kind of laughable, but the more the movie goes on, he goes from laughable to, you know, kind of frightening to sympathetic, and then back to kind of repulsive. And it says a lot about the design of the thing, because, you know, it's not a lot to look at technically, but the performance, I guess, of it's actually Dwayne who plays Belial's face in the puppet, and it's just, yeah, it evoked a lot of bad feeling out of me. I think the reason I was so in tune with the isolation and rejection, because that is heart, and the way we treat each other, is that's what's at the heart of Heathen. Something else kind of strange about Basket Case, which made me feel, was that they were raised by their auntie, Dwayne and Belial, once they were rejected by their father. And even when Belial was separated and goes out and kills his own father, splits him in half, the auntie is still there. She's like, I know what you might have done, and I'm still here to look after the pair of you. You know, just the love that she had for these two, again, really got to me. And that's so strange for any movie in general, but it's also strange for a movie where everything is completely subpar. How can you make such a bad film and yet have it still be so effective? I'm not sure that I've seen a worse put together movie, a worse acted movie than Basket Case, to the point where a lot of the time on I Know What We Watched Last Week, we'll watch bad movies and I'll say the bad acting actually added to the charm of the film. For me, it didn't add to the charm of Basket Case. In a way it does, but mostly it just added to the crapness of it. I was like, how was this piece of crap getting to me? And I think it was because it's just such a, you know, go for it idea no holds barred, that shines through, and I think the message of it shines through really well. And you've got to give Frank Henenlotter a lot of kudos for that. He actually said himself, Henenlotter, that he thought no one was ever going to see it, and once it was released, he was actually quite ashamed of it. But he shouldn't be. He shouldn't be, because it's actually ended up in the Museum of Modern Art. There are quite a lot of movies in the Museum of Modern Art, but you think about the original Night of the Living Dead. It's movies like these that are in there, but somehow Basket Case managed to, much like Belial, jump into your face and get in there as well. And who doesn't like a giant lump that slaughters faces? I do. I like a slaughtering of a face. Oh, here's something else which is just deplorable in this film, is the father of Dwayne and Belial. When his son is born, he rejects him. He says, what the hell is this thing? I wouldn't even call it human. Belial can hear all this. And when they're separated by the doctors, later on we find out when Dwayne takes Belial to Cutter's office to get revenge on her, it turns out she's a vet. She's a veterinarian. She's not even a doctor. So she's sliced off Belial like the animal he is in the eyes of society. It was just little thing. I guess maybe that is maybe an instance of the humor. Yeah, and that's dark humor, and I do enjoy that kind of dark humor. But it was just, I felt so bad for Belial already throughout this whole movie, that once I saw he wasn't even cut apart by a doctor, it was a little bit too much for me. So I'm glad that Cutter got those scalpels put in her face. I asked as well, I know what you watched last week, and I was asking about, it was Human Centipede 2, and it's the main character in that who obviously puts the 12-person centipede together, but all throughout his life he's been put down and just rejected, and I felt bad for him as well. Because the whole point is that it should never have been allowed to get to that point in the first place. You shouldn't be able to treat someone like that to get them to that point. I started thinking about, I mentioned earlier on, I'm quite a sensitive person about certain things, and I've never picked on anyone. I've never been a bully. I find that kind of the behaviour kind of deplorable. I've never caused violence against anyone. I have to defend myself a couple of times. That's completely different. But to actually cause physical harm against someone is something that I've never done, and I never will do. And I think in a way that's something that is something, okay, not to be proud of, but it's something to keep there. And that's the whole thing. It's like we have to look at the way that we're treating each other. And Basket Case, I think Basket Case does that. At the heart, that's what I want my movie Heathen to do as well, based around supernatural goings-ons and different dimensions. It's how you want to present these ideas, and you don't have to present these ideas in horror with, oh, look, I've been really badly mistreated, look at me. No, you show something kind of spectacular and you let people take from it here and there, and I think that Basket Case does that, and probably all the best horror should be doing that. I really hate that when people use horror and say nothing, and especially now they use the genre, and they'll put it into a movie. Let's just take Sinners as an example. It's not really a horror film. They just use the word horror, and they've deceived people. Basket Case is a horror movie. It's an exploitation movie. Sinners, not so much. And like I did say, that horror, there's a lot that you can do with horror, but we've got to the point now where people are just taking the piss, really. Sinners, Weapons, Backrooms, these barely count. In fact, they're kind of shameful compared. In fact, the guy that's just done that Obsession movie, he's everywhere. He's the hottest director in Hollywood, and what's he doing? Oh, I'm going to remake the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with A24. You've already lost. He said things like, oh, I don't want to just release slop. I want people to think, what would actually happen to me if I went on a road trip and never came back? Oh, so original, mate. So original. He's already such a failure. You can't remake something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's impossible, because it's a feeling. The same way that Basket Case is a feeling. The same way that even Urban Legend is a feeling. The feeling of Urban Legend for me is, a lot of people will see people get axed in the face or axed in the back, and they'll think, oh. But for me, it's just the way that Urban Legend is presented. It's not in a way to make you feel bad. It's in a way to kind of like make you feel pumped. That is a good response. It's done its job. Basket Case did the same thing made me feel really low. And like I said, I do try to avoid movies that do that to me. And there was something about the front cover of Basket Case and looking at Paul Bilal and his basket, which told me I shouldn't watch this movie because it's gonna be like watching, you know, The Lion King die or whatever, which I only did one time, because who can take a cartoon lion dying halfway through the movie? You know what? I had a mate once who was he would watch cartoons, and he brought home Finding Nemo, and I said, look, I'll watch this with you under protest. Just promise me that there's no, you know, no fish are going to die or anything. He goes, no, there's no death in it. It was like 5 minutes in and Nemo's dead, or his dad is dead, or something like that. I was in a funk again. So I don't want to see any of that. You know, I think you've got to be a real sicko to want to kill an animated character in your film. To me, that's sick. Not, you know, having a gristly lump make love to a dead woman. I mentioned briefly the sexual repression angle of Basket Case, Dwayne and Belial. And it's just a great bit towards the end where Belial grabs hold of Dwayne's nuts, and I mean, he's got it in like a vice-like grip, because Dwayne has previously told him, just because you can't doesn't mean that I shouldn't. And I think, yeah, those are words to live by. But I don't think I've ever seen anything grab quite so hard into a pair of balls as what I've seen in Basket Case. So another big bit of kudos. And, you know, it doesn't end happily. You know, they're both hanging out the window of the Motel Breslin, and they both fall to their death. And really, what way could you end Basket Case apart from both of them dying? Yet, of course, somehow Dwayne's back for a sequel or two later on, even though him and Belial are both dead. But you got to do it, haven't you? You got to have to, let's face it, baby. These days, you gotta have a sequel. Just like Urban Legend did. Urban Legend 2 is great as well. Does the same thing, makes me feel really good. And even a German guy is getting smashed in the face with his own lens to death. That makes me feel good. So yeah, two different movies. This is kind of just more of a ramble rather than what we usually do. But I just wanted to give you a slight history of me with both films. The history of Basket is pretty much nothing, because I hadn't even seen it, apart from just seeing the artwork in the video store. Whereas Urban Legend, I must have seen at least 50 times now. I'll probably watch another 50 times. I could go and watch it today, quite frankly. Got to be in a particular mood to like Basket Case. So if you felt things for Belial, I would like to hear from you. Let me know what you think about those disgusting scenes that offended the crew so much. Also, Frank Henenlotter did the same thing in Brain Damage. The crew walked out again. He's really good at offending people. You know, if that's not a selling point for your film, I don't know what is. Hopefully people will watch this without my beautiful wife by my side. Hopefully I am bringing enough beauty for you all.